An American infantry unit had already surrounded the village. The German soldiers inside had no ammunition left, no reinforcements, and no way out. But their commander, a German major, gave an order that stunned everyone. No one surrenders. What happened next forced the American soldiers to make a decision that no one on that battlefield expected. Late autumn, 1944. The Western Front is shifting almost daily as Allied forces push deeper into German-occupied Europe. Entire German formations are collapsing under the pressure of constant American and British advances. For many soldiers on the German side, the reality is becoming impossible to ignore. The war is turning against them. Across the front lines, surrender has become increasingly common. American infantry units often encounter small groups of exhausted German soldiers emerging from forests, ruined farmhouses, or trenches with their hands raised. Many of them are young, poorly supplied, and aware that continuing the fight serves little purpose. But not every officer sees it that way. On a cold morning somewhere in Western Europe, a platoon of American infantry cautiously moves toward a small village that has been partially abandoned during the recent fighting. The narrow streets are quiet, the windows broken, and smoke from earlier artillery strikes still drifts slowly between damaged buildings. The Americans expect resistance. Their orders are simple: secure the village and clear any remaining German forces. As the soldiers advance between stone houses and shattered barns, a scout suddenly signals for the unit to halt. Movement has been spotted near the village square. Through the haze of dust and smoke, several German soldiers become visible. They are positioned behind overturned carts and fragments of masonry, clearly attempting to form a defensive position. But something about the situation seems unusual. There are only a handful of them. Perhaps 8, maybe 10 soldiers at most. And standing slightly behind them is a tall officer in a dark field coat. A German major. Even from a distance, the American soldiers can see that the officer is not behaving like someone preparing to surrender. He stands upright, speaking sharply to the men around him, pointing toward different corners of the square as if assigning positions. The German soldiers glance nervously toward the approaching Americans but continue following his instructions. The American platoon quickly spreads out, taking cover behind walls, carts, and doorways. Rifles are raised. Machine guns are positioned. Yet no shots are fired. From the American perspective, the situation is confusing. The Germans are clearly surrounded. More American units are moving into the village from nearby roads, and artillery support is not far behind. The small group in the square has no realistic chance of holding their position. And yet their commander shows no sign of giving up. An American lieutenant studying the scene through binoculars lowers them slowly. He has seen situations like this before, officers refusing to accept defeat even when the outcome is obvious. But something about this moment feels different. Because now the next move belongs to the American soldiers. And one wrong decision could turn a tense standoff into a deadly firefight in the middle of the ruined village. For several long seconds, the ruined village square remains completely silent. American soldiers stay behind cover, rifles aimed toward the small German position. No one fires. No one moves too quickly. Everyone is waiting. The American lieutenant studies the scene carefully. Through the cracked lens of his binoculars, he can clearly see the German major speaking to his men. The officer's posture is rigid, controlled, almost defiant. But the men around him look very different. Some of the German soldiers appear exhausted. One of them keeps glancing toward the surrounding streets, where American troops are quietly spreading out and sealing every possible escape route. Another German soldier shifts nervously behind a broken stone wall, gripping his rifle a little too tightly. They all know the truth. They are surrounded. The lieutenant lowers his binoculars and looks back at his own men. The Americans are experienced infantry. Many of them have already seen months of fighting across France and Belgium. They recognize the signs of a collapsing defensive position. Normally, this moment would be simple. The Germans would raise their hands. The Americans would step forward, disarm them, and move the prisoners to the rear. But the German major is clearly refusing to allow that. Instead, he continues issuing orders, quietly positioning his small group as if they are preparing to defend the square. It doesn't make sense. The American lieutenant turns to his radio operator and quietly speaks into the field radio, informing nearby units about the situation. Within minutes, additional American soldiers move into surrounding streets. The circle tightens. Machine gun teams quietly set up positions covering the square from 2 different angles. A bazooka team takes position behind a collapsed wagon just in case armored resistance appears, though everyone knows that is extremely unlikely. Still, no one fires. Finally, the lieutenant makes a decision. He signals one of his sergeants. "Let's try something first." A white cloth is tied to the end of a rifle and slowly raised above the wall. The gesture is clear. An offer. A chance for the Germans to surrender without anyone getting hurt. For a moment, nothing happens. The German soldiers stare at the white cloth. One of them even lowers his rifle slightly. But then the German major steps forward. He says something sharply in German, loud enough that his men immediately straighten their posture again. Rifles come back up. The message is obvious. The Americans exchange uneasy glances. This officer is determined to hold the position. And now the standoff has reached a dangerous point. Because the longer both sides wait, the greater the chance that a single nervous movement, or a misunderstood order, could turn the silent square into another deadly firefight. The silence in the village square begins to feel heavier with every passing minute. American soldiers remain frozen behind shattered walls and broken carts, their rifles fixed on the small German position. A single wrong movement could start a firefight that none of them actually want. The American lieutenant studies the German officer again. Through the drifting smoke, the major looks calm, almost stubbornly calm. He stands slightly in front of his men now, as if trying to shield them with nothing more than authority. But the lieutenant notices something important. The German soldiers are no longer looking toward the Americans. They are watching their commander. Waiting. Not for a signal to fight, but for permission to stop. The lieutenant lowers his binoculars slowly. He has seen this pattern before during the past months of fighting across Europe. Sometimes the men on the ground understand the situation far better than the officer giving the orders. Behind the German line, one soldier quietly shifts his weight, clearly exhausted. Another glances toward the surrounding buildings again, realizing just how many American rifles are now aimed at them. They know the truth. There is no escape from this square. Yet the German major refuses to acknowledge it. Suddenly, the stillness breaks. One of the German soldiers hesitates. For just a second, his rifle dips slightly toward the ground. The American soldiers notice immediately. Several rifles tighten on their targets. Fingers rest against triggers. If that weapon rises again too quickly, the shooting will start. But before anyone reacts, the German major turns sharply toward the soldier. He steps closer and speaks in a low but forceful voice. Even from a distance, the Americans can see the tension in the exchange. The soldier slowly raises his rifle again. Not out of confidence. Out of obedience. The lieutenant exhales quietly. Now the situation has become painfully clear. These men are not fighting because they want to. They are fighting because one officer refuses to let them stop. The lieutenant looks back at his own soldiers. Many of them are young too, farmers, mechanics, students before the war. None of them want to fire the first shot if it can be avoided. So the lieutenant makes a choice. Instead of ordering an attack, he steps out from behind the wall. Immediately, several American soldiers whisper in alarm. But the lieutenant raises a hand slightly, signaling them to hold. Slowly, cautiously, he begins walking toward the open square. The German rifles instantly track his movement. Every man watching knows how dangerous this moment is. One nervous trigger pull, and the entire square will erupt. But the lieutenant keeps walking until he stops about 30 meters from the German line. Now the two officers are facing each other across the ruined square, neither of them holding a weapon raised. And for the first time since the standoff began, the battlefield becomes a place for words instead of bullets. For a few seconds, neither officer speaks. The ruined village square is so quiet that even the distant rumble of artillery somewhere far beyond the hills seems muted. American soldiers remain behind cover, watching every movement. German rifles are still raised, but the men holding them now look uncertain. The American lieutenant stands in the open, unarmed except for the pistol at his side, which remains holstered. Across the square, the German major studies him carefully. For a moment, the two men simply look at one another, soldiers who understand exactly what this war has become. The lieutenant finally breaks the silence. In a calm but firm voice, he calls out. He explains the situation plainly. The village is surrounded. More American units are arriving. Artillery support is minutes away if needed. Continuing to resist will not change the outcome. It will only cost lives. The words carry across the square. The German soldiers hear every sentence. Some of them lower their eyes. Others glance at their commander again, waiting for his response. The major says nothing at first. He stands rigidly, his expression unreadable. For him, surrender is not just a military decision, it is a question of honor, duty, and the expectations placed on every officer in the German army. Behind him, one of the younger soldiers shifts nervously. Another looks down at the nearly empty ammunition pouch on his belt. The reality of their situation is impossible to ignore. The lieutenant speaks again, this time more quietly. There's no reason for anyone else to die here. The words hang in the cold air. For the first time since the standoff began, the German major slowly turns his head and looks back at his men. They are exhausted, frightened, and waiting. What he sees on their faces is not cowardice. It is survival. For several long seconds, the square remains frozen in uncertainty. Then the major does something unexpected. He removes his gloves. Slowly, deliberately, he steps forward and walks a few meters away from his men. Every rifle on both sides follows his movement. The American lieutenant does not move. The German officer stops in the middle of the square. Then, without a word, he reaches up and removes his cap. It is a small gesture, but every soldier present understands exactly what it means. Behind him, one German rifle lowers, then another. Within seconds, the entire group places their weapons on the ground. No shots are fired. American soldiers carefully move forward to secure the prisoners, but the tension that had filled the square only moments before is already fading. Later, many of the American soldiers would remember this moment clearly. Not because of a battle, but because of the rare moment in war when restraint, not firepower, ended the fight. And sometimes, those were the decisions that saved the most lives.